Her great-grandfather, Josiah Wood, was born on the 8th of January 1849 at Carcoar, New South Wales, the fourth child born to John and Lucy Clark. Lucy Clark was previously Lucy Radburn. Josiah was 23 years of age when he married Jane Margaret Hines on the 5th of February 1872. Jane was 19 years of age. There were 4 daughters born to the marriage: Clara in 1872, Pearl in 1874, Gertrude 76 and Ada in 1879. Only 3 survived childhood, with Pearl dying in 1874. Jane died on the 27th of December 1880 as Jane Hines' wife. On the 16th of February 1878, Josiah's mother Lucy dies and is buried at Evans Swamp. With 3 small children to care and provide for, it is not surprising that Josiah remarried. Josiah was 33 when he married Louisa Jane Cardwell in 1882. Louisa was the 5th child of Robert Henry Cardwell and Bridget Watkins. Louisa was only 19 years of age. To marry a man with a ready-made family must have been a daunting experience to a 19-year-old girl, and it was only 1 year after their marriage that their own first child, Alfred Edward, was born in 1883. They were living at Blamey at the time. Other children to follow were Enoch in 84, Charles Ernest in 86. Louisa was close to giving birth to John Frederick in 1888 when Josiah's father John died on the 16th of July 1888 and is buried at Marilda. Josiah Oscar was born on the 6th of June 1890. Within the next year, the family then, Josiah and the family, had moved to Mandurama. Ethel Catherine is born in 1891 when they were living in the slab and iron roof cottage at Mandurama. He also found work with the Department of Public Works on the preparation for the construction of Waingla Dam. The assurance of regular work in uncertain times may have been the catalyst for Josiah moving the family from Mandurama to Woodstock in 1893. We do know that from family stories that Louisa moved with the family by train to Woodstock, where Josiah met the midnight train, and the children, luggage and bedding were all loaded onto one of the horse-drawn drays. Josiah had 2 of these drays there, one drawn by heavy. They moved into that night as a slab hut, slab walls and a gale iron roof. It must have been quite late before they settled down, and Louisa and her children would have been tired. They remained in the place for a day or 2, then moved out into the home which Josiah and others had helped build. That was in 1893. The slab house that they had evacuated was then occupied by the wife and family of Johnny Vane, according to the family stories. Vane was one of Ben Hall's gang of bushrangers and had been serving 15 years in jail at the time. Josh, our Uncle Josh, goes on to recount details about the farm. They had a mixed orchard of about 120 trees, plus a trellis of black and white ladyfinger grapes, also almond trees and strawberry bushes. They had their own wheat crops, 250 acres, and would take 10 bags to the flour mill, exchange it for flour, bran, pollard and wheat mill porridge. Louisa used to make jams and preserve fruit. The youngest child in the family was Herb. Herb Clarence was born at Woodstock in 1898 and started school at the Noyer Superior School in Woodstock. Herbert was to complete his schooling in Grenfell when the family moved there in 1910. The older children began to marry. Alfred married Isabella May Smith in 1905 at the Methodist Church in Cowra. Alfred then sought work to support his new wife in the mines around Wollongong. Josh and Louisa had also moved to Grenfell and were living out along the Quandong Road. Alfred was working as a road contractor, sometimes gaining work with the local shire. From around 1910 to Josiah and Louisa lived in Grenfell near their son Alfred, before moving to Sydney in 1916. Josiah, like so many men during the Depression, sought income by any ways or means, even if it meant separation from his wife. In 1930, at the age of 81, Josiah stayed with his daughter Gertie from his first marriage, and her husband Will Fowler near Blaney. With him were son Jack and Jack's son Selwyn, prospecting for gold at some of the old diggings in the area. In another letter written about the time, tells Louisa how he and Jack had borrowed a horse and sulky from grandson-in-law Bob Smith to go out to the old dry diggings to see how things looked. One of the places we were going to try was worked clean out, but the other was not touched. But we were going tomorrow to go out and try another, and if that fails, all being well, we can go out to Neville, and if that fails, I don't know what we'll do. Josiah died at Ryde in 1936. His passing was recorded in the Salvation Army Journal. Louisa outlived Josiah by 4 years. Of the three surviving daughters of Josiah's first marriage, Clara and her husband Joe Russell spent time at Cobar and then Helensburgh before settling in later years at Beverly Hills in Sydney. Ada and Charles Price similarly spent their early married life around Blaney, then Helensburgh, where Charlie was working in the nearby mines. Then they went to Ryde and then finally Penshurst. Ada and Charlie endured the loss of at least 4 of their children as babies or toddlers, while the youngest son, Charles, was killed in action in Malaya in the Second World War. The eldest son of Josiah and Lucy, Alfred, sought work in the mines around Wollongong following his marriage to May Smith. Their 2 eldest children, Daphne and Loris, were born at Helensburgh. They were in 1912. They were at Grenfell, Alfred working as a road contractor. After May's death in 1943, Alfred moved to Sydney and lived at Beverly Hills till his death 30 years later. Dolph and his wife Mabel Russell. Dolph was Morris's father, had their first daughter Lily at Woodstock, but by the early 20s they had made their home at Ryde. Grandson Russell was almost 6 when Dolph died, but remembers his grandfather sitting by the fire at his home in Ryde and fixing the little boy with dark penetrating eyes. One thing I do know about Dolph and his brother Jack, who married Mabel's sister, Nina, is that they were hard-working, intelligent, self-educated, working-class men, said Russell. Charles married Dorothy Evans at the Anglican Church in Woodstock. Charlie's work on the railways took the couple to Bullaroo, where their first child was born and died. After another short stay at Woodstock, they moved to Merrifield until 1922, where at least 4 of their children were born. During this period, Charlie worked as a clerk for an insurance company. With the onset of Depression, they moved to Ryde, where 2 of Charlie's brothers, Dolph and Jack, lived. Charlie's parents, Louisa and Josiah, lived with them at Hermitage Road for about 2 years before they found a house of their own. By this time, the Depression meant most families had little income. Charlie worked on the roads for the council on relief work. Mum, Dorothy, remembers going to the swimming pool and seeing her dad painting the fence. It's a swimming pool down on the Parramatta River. All the children left school early to work and support the family during the Depression. Doreen worked at Nestles, Iris and Olga at the pharmacy factory in the city, Dorothy as a sales assistant for a hotel supplier, Lloyd in the office of the railway train manufacturer near Meadowbank Station. During the Second World War, Lloyd fought in the serious battles of Milne Bay and Tarakan. Charlie died from a heart attack near Central Station, Sydney, aged 57 in 1943. his widow Dorothy, a warm, loving grandmother, died in 1967. Jack married Mina Russell, sister of Dolph's wife Mabel, and their eldest children were born in around Cowra before they too joined many of the family who had settled in the Ryde district. Jack and his brother Josh, only 2 years apart in age, remained firm and close friends throughout their lives. Wrote Josh many years later, Jack was a kind and loving brother, son and father. He was a great mate to me when we grew up together in our old home in Woodstock. Josh trained as a Salvation Army officer and was preparing to go to France as an ambulance driver with the Army Medical Corps when the armistice was signed. Instead, he then became an assistant supervisor at Box Hill Boys Home in Melbourne and did relieving work in Tasmania and Queensland. After his marriage to Kitty Moyer, Josh became assistant superintendent at Tellyhay Boys Home in East Melbourne. As Josh's son Byrne recalls, that his father had a very strong sense of justice and used to go to the local speaker corner in Box Hill and expound his feelings about the unjust society we lived in. Herbert enlisted in September 1916. His parents, Josiah and Louisa, signed the application on the condition he did not leave Australia till he had reached the age of 19. Herb celebrated his 19th birthday on the HMAT Marathon on the way to England. 3 years later, he married Maud Gibson. The youngest daughter was Ethel, and Mum remembers going to see her laying in state in Ryde when they lived there. She died before giving birth to a child, or just after.